secondary art students. We're back for another week of art history. I hope you all are doing well and trusting in the Lord that we are going to get through this and there will be light at the end of the tunnel. This week in art history we are talking about someone you probably have never heard of. His name is Anders Zorn. And Anders Zorn was an artist from Sweden, from a town called Mora, Sweden. And he was alive around the same time as the person we learned about last week, John Singer Sargent. And they have a very similar background and repertoire of art. Anders Zorn grew up not in poverty, but in a much more humble beginning than John Singer Sargent. But where those two collide is the fact that they loved Europe. They loved to travel around Europe and learn about the history of Europe, and they were both classically trained artists. Anders Zorn went to the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm, Sweden, and that's where he got his training, and he thought he would be a wood carver, and then eventually got into watercolors, much like John Singer Sargent did, and became a very well-known watercolor artist, and then moved into oils and started doing portrait painting. That's how he made a name for himself. The portrait painters always made the money, so it would behoove them to get involved with portrait painting because that paid the bills and earned them a lot of wealth. And both John Singer Sargent and Anders Zorn developed a very rich clientele, people that wanted their portraits painted or their family members painted. And Anders Zorn particularly liked traveling to the US sometimes, and you may have seen one of his paintings if you've ever been to the Biltmore. One of his paintings hangs in the Biltmore. It's called the Waltz. It was done after he did an etching. He was a famous etcher as well as painter. And the Waltz is hanging in the Biltmore, and if you ever go down there you can see it. But Zorn was very popular in the United States and was even asked to paint 3 of our president's portraits, and did an etching of Teddy Roosevelt. He did William Howard Taft and Grover Cleveland portraits, formal portraits. He was an award-winning artist, and after he kind of developed a name for himself, he spent a lot of time in his homeland of Sweden. He would spend summers there and had a cabin and things, and would travel Europe different seasons, but would always come back to Mora, Sweden. And he started painting bathers in the lakes and streams up there in Sweden, and those paintings became extremely popular. We're not going to focus on the bathers, but the fact that he could paint water better than most anyone else, it was said that he was divinely gifted. So those paintings became very, very popular, and he even got lumped in sometimes with the Impressionists. Anders Zorn was not an Impressionist, but he could marry Impressionism and realism beautifully, much like John Singer Sargent. They both had that gift, but Anders Zorn really had a knack for being able to do light in a way that hadn't been done before, and interpreting light, whether it was firelight from a fireplace, or light streaming through a window, or just sunlight, daylight, and especially the way it reflected off the water. So he was really gifted in that way, diffused light. So he painted in the open air, in plein air, like we talked about last week, as did John Singer Sargent, and those became some of his most famous paintings. But He was a portraitist, probably above all else, and made his money doing portrait art, and has a slew of beautiful watercolors on top of that. So he was very popular all over Europe and in the United States. And as I said, he painted the presidents, 3 of them. And he's also, one thing that's interesting to know about him is that he came from not a lot and ended up making a big name for himself. And that kind of is similar to the American dream. He went after something and achieved great things. The other thing I want you to remember about Anders Zorn in terms of art class is he used what's called a limited palette. Not every time, but most of the time when he did a painting, he used a very limited amount of colors. In fact, there's the Zorn palette named after him. Many of his most famous paintings were done with what's called the Zorn palette. And the Zorn palette incorporates white with yellow ochre, which is kind of a mustardy, dark, yellowish gold color. Vermilion, which is a bright red, a cadmium red. Some people say cadmium red light, some people say cadmium red medium, but vermilion is that kind of bright orangey red color. And then ivory black, and ivory black has some coolness in it that helps render him with these kind of almost bluish tones and olive greenish tones. And if you have art with me next year, you may learn about the Zorn palette, and we may even practice making it. So this week in art history, I have 2 videos for you to watch. One's a little documentary about Anders Zorn, and the other one is a demonstration of the Zorn palette, and it's speed photographed, so it goes pretty quickly, but you can make it go even faster if you want. That won't bother me. I just want you to see someone doing the Zorn palette. But at the end of the Zorn palette video, they show some of his most famous paintings in which he used the Zorn palette. So I definitely want you to make sure you see the end of that video. But it's pretty interesting. So watch the 2 videos, answer the questions this week, and enjoy this art history lesson on Anders Zorn.